All right, everybody, hello and thank you and welcome here. We are about to dive into, well, the third live stream on my channel here. Wes Bryan and I will be diving into, in this live stream, we're going to be talking a little bit about the CompTIA A Plus Core 2 220-1202 exam. And what I'd like to do is take the time and kind of do a deep dive into the exam. And if you were just getting into the industry, if you were maybe preparing for this certification, maybe it's the first certification you've taken, or any kind of real exam or test that you've taken in a while. I know when I was a career changer, this was a very daunting exam for me, not knowing how much to study, what to study, and hopefully we can demystify and reduce the stress that you might have if you are not aware of certification exams. And again, especially where this is a foundational exam that a lot of people take for the very first time, getting into the industry and getting an A+ certification. So that's really what we want to do. We want to take the time to do that. I will tell you, it's a pretty loose format. You might see me even correct things right in the live stream because, well, I am that darn good. If you've seen episode 2, we went into the Core 1 deep dive, the A+ Core 1 220-1201 deep dive. Definitely check that out. Give it a like, share it if you know anybody that is currently studying for the A+ certification, and share this one as well too, because I do this, don't really need any money for it. Just want to help the community. Tell you a little bit about myself. My name's Wes Bryan. I've been an IT instructor, technical instructor now for almost 15 years, doing a variety of different types of training. Whether it's traditional instructor-led, remote training, online training, and subscription-based training as well. I'm also a subject matter expert in a variety of different CompTIA certifications, and I work with a few different vendors in the industry, creating things like practice questions for practice exams, and doing technical reviews as well. So I'm looking forward to sharing some of my knowledge with you and hopefully help you out, because I've also been a mentored learning instructor in the past where, I would help students plan a method of attack, strategize, if you will, where they were based on their practice exam reports, score reports, and help them, kind of tailor a plan of attack to help each individual student, be successful on their exam. Because I remember, I do recognize that we all learn a little bit differently, right? We have different methods, but if we can have some of that foundational knowledge, regardless of where we are actually or how we learn, then hopefully it can help you out. Now you can follow me, and you can find me on LinkedIn at Wesley A. Bryan. You can also find me out there on X, or I should say Gmail first. My email is ws.bryan1@gmail.com. All right, just had to get to that X platform, formerly known, or the platform I should say, formerly known as Twitter. You can find me at ws_BRYAN or Bryan1, kind of like my email address too. And then I also encourage you to join us on Discord. All of our live streams that we do here and in the future, we'll be bringing in guests. If they have resources such as the PowerPoint presentation that you see right here, or additional resources will be loaded up on our community Discord server. So I encourage you to check it out. We have other students of technology there, other people that are taking certification exams as well. And also, the community members will also lend a hand. And if they find things that have made, an impact on their training, they share those resources as well. So keep in mind, you can find me on the Discord channel here, and all of the live stream resources that are, will be uploaded there. And if you are a community member, you can gain access to that. Again, no charge. Just to help you out, and want to help make you successful, right? We're going to train in IT, but we're going to do it right. So let's go ahead and let's dive in to our concepts. One last shameless plug, as I always have to do, because it really does help out. If you like what you see here, I encourage you to like the video. Please subscribe. And comments are welcome too. As we grow this community of support, I want to hear from you. I really enjoy it. It's one of the things that I really enjoy, and sometimes you can miss when it comes to any kind of online modality, interacting with our viewers here, and that's why I do encourage you, go to that Discord server. But comment, share, and remember also, click that little notification bell that's somewhere around here, right? And any of the other videos that might pop up. All right, so now that you know whether you should steal, you should steal second here with my baseball signals here. Let's go ahead. Let's dive into the topics. All right. So the first thing that I want to kind of address here is just a high-level overview of the domains and that you will face on the 220 1202 exam. Just going to call it the 1202 or the Core 2 exam. It gets a little get a little tongue-tied here. You can see that maybe my speaking abilities aren't that great when I'm tongue-tied. So the domains that we're going to talk about and we will discuss here, there's 4 domains, which is a little bit different than the 5 domains that we've seen inside of the episode 2 there of our live stream talking about the 220-1201 exam. That was 5 domains. The very first domain that you're going to start to have to understand is the operating system domain. You'll see that the Core 2 exam is very software focused. I know in the earlier revisions of these exams you would see they would say one was based on hardware and one's based on software, and largely that is true. But remember, you use software to control hardware, so sometimes there is a blending, right? A blending of a crossing of the streams, total protonic reversal. So you can see this is, almost 30% of our entire exam going out the gate is going to be dedicated to operating systems. So very hefty weight when it comes to this domain. Then we move into security. Domain 2 is security, also a very heavy weighted domain. We are at almost 60% of the overall 100% exam weight here. Next up is software troubleshooting. When we look at software troubleshooting, it's another one that's kind of got a little bit of weight there, and 23% here, not quite as much as the the first 2. And good morning, Furious George out there. Love to see you in the chat room. Thank you for joining. Thank you as always for your support and being part of the community. And hopefully we can get a lot of other wonderful people in here as well. All right, so that's domain 3.0. That is the software troubleshooting domain. Notice we can see a lot of software focus, right? Next one up is in the final domain. Is the operational procedures domain. 21% here. This is where you learn, some of the professionalism and communication. Again, we'll dive a little bit more into this coming up, but this is where you get things like, safe component handling and storage, repair, as well as, safe operational safety procedures for the personnel as well, too. Documentation, things like incident handling, and even some, additional topics like, for instance, scripting at a very basic level will be in this domain as well, too. All right, let me take a look at the chat room here and just make sure I am not avoiding anybody here. But let's go ahead. So that's our breakdown, right? When we talk about the 220-1201 exam, our overall 100% of the exam that you will encounter. Now, let's go ahead and move on. Let's talk a little bit about the skills required. One of the things I want you to pay attention to is I encourage you, and I'll put the link up here at the end in our slides here. And again, remember, hop over to Discord if you want to grab the slides so that you can have these resources too. I want to kind of talk about the skills that are kind of required that when you look at the verbiage of the 220-1202 exam. We did this in episode 2 with the A+ 220-1201 exam. Again, encourage you to look at that. It is up on the YouTube channel as well. And what I want to do is kind of break down what are the objectives asking you to do? What are the skills that are going to be required? Because explaining something is a lot different than applying something. Right? If we're making pizza and I ask you to give me out of this list the 4 common, maybe not 4, maybe let's just say 2, right? 50-50. 2 common ingredients in a pizza, right? That's explaining it. That's summarizing, identifying, right? Versus in which order do you place these toppings, right? Do you do sauce first? Do you do cheese, veggies, however that might be? Now that's how do you apply, right? How do you implement, right? You need to turn the oven on. You need these 4 dials to be in this order. Put those, configure them appropriately according to the scenario, right? That is more of an application, right, of whatever the skill might be. And that's why I want to kind of talk about this, because you're going to see It might be eye-opening. If you haven't seen the objectives, again, go over to CompTIA's website. They've got a lot of good resources over there, and one of the resources that I encourage you to get very familiar with in any exam, really, that you're going to take, whether it's CompTIA or Microsoft, is knowing what the skills are that are required to to pass the exam. What is it that they're measuring you against? And that's going to be something that's going to be kind of important here to be aware of. All right, so let's go ahead. Let's break these skills down a little bit, and let's talk about the very first concept that I want you to be aware of. The very first concept that I want you to be aware of is that when we look at these skills, we're going to divide them up into what do we need to do, and how many of the objectives out of this the skill that is required, how many times do we find that, right? And what this is going to really do is it's going to help you to understand what is the level that you have to, really do you have to go into when it comes to passing the exam. I want you to take the checklist. I want you to take the resources that I'm giving you here and understand, right? Which, by the way, happens to be one of those skills that you need as well too. But to be able to apply it to it, if it says given a scenario, summarize this. Well, you have to be able to identify it. So it might be something that's flashcard material versus if it gives you an install and configure, now we need to go to things like vendor documentation and find what are the basic procedures to get this technology up and running, to maintain it or troubleshoot it. So with that, let's talk about the very first thing that I want you to be aware of. Out of 19 of the, or out of all of the objectives under each domain, 19 of them start with given a scenario. The reason I want you to be aware of this is because when we talk about given a scenario, and again, I know it might sound obvious, not talking down to anybody when I say this. I mean, we now are talking about a scenario-based question. And that's why when you look at the objectives, if it says given a scenario, I want you to think, maybe blindsided. If there was a scenario that was given to you on the exam, how do you think you would do, right? So how well do you think you know that topic? And that can also help out. But here's the thing. Given a scenario doesn't really tell me much. Given a scenario, I need to do something. But what is that something that I need to do? Oh, and absolutely, Furious George asks, out there in the chat room asks, do I plan on doing more CompTIA exams? Absolutely. I plan on going through every single CompTIA exam there is, doing these same things as well. And we're also going to do some Microsoft exams as well. So look for that coming up too, Furious George. If you all out there are currently studying things like Microsoft 365, maybe you want to become an endpoint administrator, I do have coming up in our certification talks, one coming up on MD 102. So shameless plug for that video coming up, but absolutely there. And thank you for asking that question. So we have 19, given a scenario, do something, right? So what do they break down? What is it that we need to do? Well, the very first one we need to understand is troubleshooting. That appears 4 times. Troubleshoot this. The other thing is implementation. Right now, if we talk about implementation and troubleshooting, sometimes troubleshooting can be nothing more than an explanation. If it's identifying a certain procedure that needs to happen next, right? But you still have to have a certain amount of understanding to be able to do it. Remember, implementing. We talk about implementing as a scenario-based situation. Given a scenario, implement this. This is where your performance-based questions might come in. And I talk about the exam, when it comes to performance, any of the questions. We're not going to talk about anything I've ever seen on the exam. But relative to, like, maybe cooking a pizza, I can tell you the difference between some of these different question types, which we did talk about in episode 1. We have an overview of both exams and some of the examples of question types. So we need to do some implementation here as well. Well, I'll tell you, we go even farther because now we have applying. I'm not really sure sometimes at some point the implement versus apply. Keep in mind it could be something where, let me give you an example. You need to implement a firewall, right? But then you need to apply settings within that firewall. So a little bit different, right? So I want you to keep in mind that when we talk about apply, this shows up 4 times out of the body of exam objectives. All right, so after apply, we have use. Again, another one of those where we're talking about a lot of scenario-based, potential performance-based questions. All right, so for instance, use, we can see here, it appears 6 times across the overall exam objective. Now, you might be asking yourself, well, are we going to see those exam objectives? Absolutely. Here in the deep dive, we are going to go through every one of these objectives coming up. Then we have a compare and contrast, right? Compare and contrast, I want you to think about that as kind of like flashcard material, right? If I have a set of protocols, so for instance, you know, in the 1201 exam, you have a series of protocols. You need to be able to identify them. You need to know when one is used over the other, right? That's a compare and contrast. We talk about an operating system, for instance, right? One of the requirements is knowing the different features that are available for the different editions of Windows, right? Home Edition is going to be a consumer-based edition of Windows, where Pro Edition, you start to get small business features, ability to join the domain, right, and control the operating system through an Active Directory domain environment. You need all of the features that Windows 10 or 11 support. Then guess what? You're going to need an enterprise-level edition, right? So that's compare and contrast. And that also goes along with things like explanations and summarize. I'm going to go ahead and do both of these because if you look at these three, compare and contrast, explain, and summarize, this is really, when you look at that exam objective and what it's requiring you to know about and compare and contrast, these are flashcard definitions, right? And I know flashcards, you know, rogue memorization is horrible. I know it sucks. It's like doing push-ups, and if anybody's ever seen me, I can't do push-ups to save my life, but unfortunately, sometimes we just have to do it. Remember, especially if you're getting into the industry, you're learning a new language, and you know, if you can't speak the language, there's really no way you can do a compare and contrast or explain or summarize. Like for instance, I would love to learn Spanish because I just think it's a beautiful language, but I can barely speak good English, well, actually barely speak bad English, right? So I wouldn't be able to have a conversation, you know, to somebody who is fluent or native Spanish speaking individual, right? Until I learned that language, then I could do some of these other basic things that we talk about, like compare and contrast, explain, and summarize. So keep in mind that flashcards aren't always fun, but it could be something that is the difference between pass or fail in the exam, so don't overlook it. All right, now we've got more of the practical application of what we are learning. This is where we get into install and configure. You're going to see that this is in a single time, but don't say, whew, just one time, because they also run solo or standalone as well too. You'll see install by itself twice, configure by itself as well too. All right. Then last but not least, we have identify. And when we look at identify comes up in our objectives, well, one time, a whopping one time on that one. So install and configure collectively, but both of those skills and the identify, they appear one time in your objective, body of objectives. Now, another way that we could look at this too is what is the level of skill that you should be applying to your studies when it comes to learning these technologies. All right, when we talk about learning these technologies, I say group by skill level. These are actually the Bloom's taxonomy, sorry. Oh, I know it's important to instructional design, but I'm just going to change it to skill level. But this is essentially the skill level that you need for the different skills required that we talked about. So under understand, we have, oh, that was redundant, understand. All right, so in the category of understand, we have summarize appearing 3 times, explain. It's appearing 4 times. And then when we look at compare and contrast and identify, we're talking compare and contrast is 3 times and identify is once. Then when it comes to the application of the skills that you need to learn, identified by the objectives, you can see that we have install twice, we have configure 3 times, we have apply, install and configure, both, not in a standalone nature. We have them at 1, and then we have use and apply, use being 6 times, apply being 4 times. and then finally we have implement. So notice that when you look at the skills, the skill level here, right under apply, we've got 6 different skill levels for that one versus the 4 that we see in the understand. And then when we look at analyze, analyze has troubleshoot, and troubleshoot is 4 times that we see this. Now, let's kind of apply, if you will, that to what we've learned, right? So what is the action that they want you to do will help to give you an idea of how how much you need to study it combined with the skill level, right? So a lot of these are understand, but you can see a lot of them are also apply, which means you have to take the technology and not just be able to tell me that I mentioned earlier, for instance, the additions of Windows, right? Not just telling me that, oh, yeah, I can identify that Pro has this feature available, but I need you to know not only to identify that Enterprise has this feature, but I need you to implement BitLocker, or I need you to implement not just BitLocker, but I need you to implement something like AppLocker that might only be specific to that edition of Windows, not unlike something that you might find on the exam. All right, let me go ahead, take a look at our chat room. We've got some great questions that have come in a couple of times, looks like. All right, thank you. Let's go ahead and let's move on into, well, our next portion that we want to talk about, and that's where we start to break down our domains. Now, the very first domain, if you remember, is operating systems. That's 28%. Does make up a good portion of the exam. I'm going to go ahead and bring out the electric cloth. I am in Florida here, so I apologize ahead of time, and let's go ahead and caffeinate with my Twit TV coffee mug there. All right. So before we get into the operating systems and the individual objectives, what I want to tell you is a little bit about the operating systems that you're going to be required to know. All right, on every A+ exam, you have had to know about Windows. But I also want to mention Windows, where it stands in our current versions of Windows. All right, depending on when you're watching this, on October 14th of 2025, for me, that's this year. That'll be in a few months. It is going to be end of life for Windows 10, which means unless you have extended security updates or you plan on migrating to Windows 11, no more security support. All right, so what does that mean for your exam? Does that mean that when October comes, you're not going to have to, you aren't, excuse me, let me try a little better English. You're not going to have to understand those topics? No, unfortunately, that's not the case, because it is still, while it might not be supported mainstream, it is still going to most likely be required knowledge on the exam. Let me give you an example where I've seen that in the past. When I took my A+ exam, you needed to know Windows 2000, you needed to know Windows, and that was 2000 Professional, and you needed to know, of course, XP and some of the other editions. I can't remember if Vista had come out at the time. But I couldn't find Windows 2000, right? And it was because it was no longer supported, right? But I still had to study for it because there was a potential that it would be on the exam. I know sometimes in these changing of the operating systems in which versions, sometimes that gets caught up in the exam. So I want you to be aware that yes, you should still be studying Windows 10. And another thing I want you to know is that yes, you should be understanding Windows 11 as well too. Now, if it's not called out expressly in the exam objective, I still want you studying it, because CompTIA, they always reserve a little spot where they make a mention that, hey, you are required to know Windows 11, but I am going to tell you, I still want you to study Windows 10 as well. So that will help out tremendously when it comes to your success. So that's a little bit about Windows. I do want you to keep in mind, you're going to have to know about Mac OS, right? Apple's proprietary proprietary operating system. You're also going to have to know about a little bit about Linux as well too. So those are the 3 operating systems I want you to be aware of. Let's go ahead, let's dive into the very first objective and talk about what we need to know. All right, so I've kind of explained the operating system types that we need to be aware of. I will tell you one that I didn't mention, and it's just because it's newer. I don't use it a lot, but that's no, I guess that's no excuse, is Chrome OS. Know about Chrome OS too, and understand, be able to explain, their purposes. So when it comes to your workstation operating systems, know Windows, Linux, Mac OS, and Chrome OS. But then we have to change our focus and keep in mind we have mobile operating systems as well. You have iOS, and the deviation, because at one time it was all iOS for things like your iPhones and iPads, but now iPad OS, and for a bit now, isn't something that's new. iPad OS is out there, and as well as your Android operating system. Now, going along with that, you have a variety of file system types that you need to be aware of as well. And I would know that which file system types are associated with which operating system. So for instance, if you're inside of Windows, you're going to be using potentially one of three, maybe four, right? Let me see, catch myself off guard, right? This is the problem with sometimes with a live stream, right? NTFS, obviously the native file system for Windows, but remember you also have exFAT that works. You have REFS in certain situations that you can use, and you can also use things like the different versions of FAT, especially FAT32, because remember it's an industry standard. exFAT is something that's not only used in Windows, but allows us to go between Mac operating systems. And really, when we look at the special interest group that oversees the SD card standards, that's exFAT's become the standard for those cards as well. So notice what I'm doing. I'm kind of explaining, right, if you can have that conversation with me and be able to identify some of the characteristics of those file types as well too, you're going to be doing really good for the exam, as well as what I mentioned, like compatibility between operating systems and why we might see one over the other. All right, so next up is going to be 1.2. All right, when you look at 1.2, this is operating system installations, and these are and upgrades as well across diverse environments. Right, we're going to be looking at different boot methods, different types of installations. Right, what is the difference between a clean install, an upgrade installation, an image deployment? Have you ever heard of ZTI, zero touch infrastructure, and maybe even LTI, light touch infrastructure? Right, things that we can do with Microsoft, such as Microsoft products like the System Center Configuration Manager Suite, and considerations around things like upgrades as well too. But then we're going to put our vendor focus on, right? Because we're going to switch over to Microsoft here, and you will see quite a few of the operating system sections are going to focus in on the different characteristics and attributes of Microsoft's Windows editions. So for instance, I've kind of already mentioned most of them. I think the only one I didn't mention was Pro for Workstation, right? So Home, Pro for Workstation, Enterprise, right? And this is also in Windows 11. So Windows 10 and Windows 11, as well as things like upgrade paths, right? If you already have an edition of Windows installed, let me give you a scenario, for instance, Windows 11 Home, and you want to maybe take advantage of some of the business features like a domain join, which can't happen in the Home editions. What options do you have for upgrade? Can you go to a Windows Pro edition? Can you go to a Windows Enterprise? What does it require for a Windows Enterprise edition, right? Things like volume license agreements and software assurance policies, so as well as some of the hardware requirements. And this is one of the things that I also want to just take a second here and mention, right? We focus in a lot on the second exam being, software based. And I'm very careful with that designation, right? Hardware for 1201, software for 1202. That's really, they operate really in the same space, right? Because when you look at the requirements for a Microsoft Windows edition, that's software, right? Software that allows us to control our hardware. But I also need to know the hardware requirements when we're talking about BIOS and UEFI that we've talked about in another live episode, and something that if you've already taken that 1201 exam, maybe you've passed it, right, or you're studying for it, you're like, hey, wait a second, I've seen this in 1201, right? So it does make sense that when you think about this exam, I don't want you to think about that very hard demarcation point between hardware and software, so that these topics don't catch you off guard. All right, so we're 3 in. We got a bunch to go. Hopefully everybody, everybody's enjoying this. And again, especially if you are just getting started for the first time, because my name is Wesley Bryan, and Wes Bryan as I go by, WB Training, and let's continue on. We've got more to talk about here. 1.4, what do we mention in here? Yes, we are focusing in back on Windows. Imagine that, right? Now we're going to talk about the operating system in general, the features such as things like Task Manager, what is an MMC, Microsoft Management Console, and a variety of different tools that you might use, right? Do you know what MS Info 32 is, right? .exe specifically, right? The run line command that allows you to launch system information, right? Things like disk defragment and disk cleanup, right? A variety of different tools you need to be able to identify. Now, I tell you what, this next exam objective, I remember getting started out as an A+ student, and when they mentioned the Microsoft Command Line tool, I barely knew my way around the graphical user interface or even what a GUI was, you know, the point-and-click technology. And then we open up this thing that looked like a terminal, and I had to now understand the syntax behind commands, right? So it is here, but I will tell you, practice, and being able to use these through that practice is going to be immensely helpful for your success on the exam. So notice knowing different navigation commands, network commands such as ipconfig, ping, netstat, nslookup, a variety of others too. Things like disk management and file management, right? Whether we're talking about disk part, or MD, you know, making a directory or removing a directory through things like RM, dir, and informational as well as OS management type commands you will have to know as well. So just think your command line interface, and you will need to know some of the options behind each one of the commands and what are those scenarios in which we would use these. So notice use. Now we got that given a scenario here, and I haven't mentioned this. I'm glad we're only about 6 objectives in with plenty more to go, because notice what we see here. What given a scenario, use the appropriate Microsoft command line tools. You will have to know how to use these. So if I need to, and let me give you a scenario here, right? Not that you're going to see this on the exam, but if I need to see all of the active TCP connections and ports and what their current state is. Are they listening? Are they established connection? You know, are they waiting? Have they timed out? I can use netstat-a, right? Shows me every single one of the TCP and UDP protocol connections, although UDP protocol is a connectionless protocol. If I wanted to see what are all of the Ethernet statistics, right? I could do a netstat-e, right? That shows me all the Ethernet statistics on that network adapter, right? So knowing where to use those and how to use those are important. So when we talk about scenarios, I do want you to know that, you know, some of it is going to be flashcard based, but you will have to know how to use these. So I would encourage you in a lab environment to open up a command prompt and run through these commands, be able to identify them and how to use them and where you'll use them. Then we have a plethora, I just needed to say that word, right, of window settings, right? So we look at a variety of different window settings. You can see that in the first column of these, a lot of them have to deal with the older, more legacy interface known as control panel. Things like internet options, device and printers, programs and features, network and sharing center. Most of these are still there, but they're not grouped together that way. So you have to know kind of an older interface, the control panel, as well as the more modern Windows settings interface that we find in Windows 10 and Windows 11, right? So that is something to keep in mind, because the way they ask these objectives, there's a couple of different ways you can configure it, and as I tell all of my students and all of the people that I support, I don't know which way they're going to ask you, so know more than one way to get to these settings, including things like power options, right? Because notice what it says, given a scenario, configure. Right? We should know by now, based on our earlier conversation, what does that really mean? What level do I have to understand? Well, it means that if I don't know how to configure these settings, I might have to look up some Microsoft documentation, which I encourage you to do, because you can always get that information, good information from the vendor themselves. Next up, we look at 1.7, right? 1.7 is given a scenario, configure Microsoft Windows networking features, right? This is where they're going to get you to prove that you know how to do things like join a computer to a domain. What's the difference between a domain and a work group? And how do we share resources? How do we establish things like network connections, whether it's a VPN, maybe it's a wired Ethernet connection, or it's a Wi-Fi, you know, your 802.11 wireless connection, and how do we configure configure those too. You'll have to look at things like network configuration, right? So do you know what the TCP/IP properties of a network adapter are, and how do we configure things like the IPv4 address, the DNS primary and alternative? I should say that DNS servers, right? Subnet masks, your default gateway. Are we doing this static versus DHCP, right? Are we doing a dynamic implementation, and really knowing how the configurations work for both of those? Then we leave, it seems like we've been here for a bit, we leave the Windows sphere, and what we're going to do is move from the Windows operating system out of that into the Mac operating system, right? And this is where we need to know a variety of different things about the Mac operating system, right? What are some of the file types, right? Your disk image files, DMG files, your packages or PKG files, your .app files. Knowing the structure around things like your system folders, right? What is the /applications versus the /users directory? Also keeping in mind, those of you that are new to this exam, remember that you'll see commonly in Windows we're using backslashes, where in Mac OS and Linux, they're using that Unix original derivative, and it's using // there. And knowing that, right? Knowing some of the features of the app, the Mac operating system or Mac OS, such as what's the difference between mission control? Can you identify keychain? What's a spotlight search, right? What are gestures? What's Finder, right? Knowing, for instance, File Explorer is the file management, the GUI-based file management utility inside of Windows versus Finder, which is the GUI-based file management utility inside of the Mac operating system as well, too. All right, before we move on, let me just check the chat room here, and looks like we are good. What do you say we go ahead and let's move on down the trail here. So we're going to move into 1.9, and this is where we switch and change our focus over to the Linux desktop and operating system, and we're going to have to know a variety of different things. Commands, for instance, file management commands, and there's a variety of them, file system management. The difference between a super user do, right, a sudo, and an su, or switch user command. We're going to have to know about package management, such as the apt command and the DNF, or the DNF package management utility inside of your Red Hat implementations, if I could say that right, and a variety of different networking commands as well, too. All right, let's get out the electric cloth here. Again, hot in Florida here. I apologize ahead of time. All right, next up is 1.10. All right, when we look at 1.10, this is the installation of our applications according to requirements, right? Given a scenario, right? Notice this one. Given a scenario, you're going to need to understand, how do we install that application if we have a set of requirements? What's the RAM? Is it, what's the architecture that's required? Is it going to be 32-bit, which has kind of gone by the wayside? It's still out there, but, right, we're largely using 64-bit and things like ARM, right? Are we using things like ARM64, right? So next up, we have given a scenario, install and configure. Notice another install and configure. That is the one that we mentioned here that is a combined skill level. This is going to be supporting things like email systems and a variety of different collaboration tools. All right, everybody, and that takes us out of the very first domain. The next domain also is going to be 28% of your exam. Keep it in mind, we're almost up to 60%. We haven't even left the second domain here, and that is security. All right, so when we dive into security, the very first thing that we need to be able to do is summarize. Remember, this is flashcard type material. Summarize various security measures, and this is where you're going to be able to identify, summarize, physical security, physical access security, and things like logical security, and some of the different components that make those those technologies. Then we're going to turn back our attention to the Windows operating system, focusing more specifically on the OS security settings, things like Defender and antivirus, firewalls, what are users and groups and permissions. A variety of different features that allow us to implement security. BitLocker, the EFS, or the encrypting file system, and then some different attributes of Active Directory. So for Windows domain environments, right, providing us centralized authentication and object management. Then we move into 2.3. When we look at 2.3, this is wireless security, all about wireless security. You can see the security protocols and authentication mechanisms we're going to talk about and have to be able to identify, compare and contrast. I'm going to say it again, compare and contrast, right? Flashcard material. What is the difference between, why wouldn't we use, let me rephrase this, right? Because they have things like TKIP on there, the Temporal Key Integrity Protocol. Why might we not be using something like WPA versus WPA2 versus WPA3, right? Why would we want to implement something like the AES or the Advanced Encryption Standard? And we look at authentication mechanisms, right? Kerberos, right? Something we get inside of Active Directory. And again, they're standalone Kerberos implementations, but that's a very common one. And other remote access technologies like Radius and TACACS. All things that you need to be able to identify and compare and contrast. Then we come up to 2.4, and when we look at 2.4, notice that it is a summarization, right? Summarize the type of malwares, tools, methods for detection, removal, and prevention, right? So we're going to have to be able to identify different different types of malware, right? Whether it happens to be a rootkit, virus, spyware, ransomware, what's a boot sector virus, right? What's, a phylus malware that doesn't ever write itself to the disk, right? Making it a little bit difficult to find sometimes, right? Adware as well, and then the tools and methods such as recovery consoles, EDR, the endpoint and detection and response, and even extended detection and response, right? A more advanced version of EDR. Things like antivirus and anti-malware, as well as software-based firewalls. And then one that is very important to security, ask anybody that's been into security for a while, or had to do security training, that's end user education, right? Very, very important because there are a lot of phishing campaigns out there, so we have to implement things like anti-phishing training, and it could be something that you need to be able to summarize on the exam. All right, then we move over to 2.5. When we look at 2.5, this is compare and contrast. Again, what is the level? This is 28% over your exam, but notice that's 28% so far. A pretty hefty being able to memorize. I want to say rogue memorization. It's not all rogue memorization because some of these could be given a scenario, so you do have to be able to identify the scenarios in which they would be used, but basically flashcard level material, right? Looking at different social engineering attacks, threats, and vulnerabilities, right? We look at phishing, shoulder surfing, tailgating, impersonation, dumpster diving, right? Other ones as well, too. Some of the threats we talk about are denial of services, DOSs, or even DDoSs, distributed denial of service attacks. Various password attacks, right? What's the difference between a brute force and a dictionary attack? What is an on-path attack, right? Where we have somebody that can potentially sit in between source and destination of a communication and eavesdrop on that communication. And then vulnerabilities as well, too, such as unpatched systems, non-compliant systems, legacy systems, and something that I mentioned already in the beginning about Windows 10 EOL. What does that mean, right? End of life. Not that we need any more acronyms here in IT, because I thoroughly believe that if we didn't have acronyms, we couldn't speak. We'll let you know ahead of time. Again, in Florida here, as always. We got some weather going on in the background, so just want you to be aware of it. It might come through in the audio. Apologize ahead of time. Next up is 2.6. When we look at 2.6, we are given a scenario and we are implementing, right, basic procedures for malware remediation and removal, all right, and we've got a process that you should be aware of, and this is one of those things that, yes, it is memory, it is being able to identify it on an exam, being able to explain it because it is a 10-step process, but you're also going to have to know the adjacencies of each one of those steps in that process. So very important to keep that in mind as well. Next up, we have 2.7. When we look at 2.7, this is applying workstation and security options and hardening techniques. This is where we learn about password considerations and some of the firmware-based security implementations that we can implement, account management, changing our defaults, right? Default administrative passwords and user accounts. And then next we get into 2.8, right? This is applying common methods for securing mobile devices, right? Those different hardening techniques, but keep in mind we're switching, right, from our workstation security, and we are moving into our operating system technologies there as well. All right, give me one moment here. All right, so we're going to go ahead and let that go. I'm going to mute this just for a second. All right, so moving on here. I apologize for that little bit of a interruption there. Let's go ahead and let's move into 2.9. When we look at 2.9 now, this is going to be compare and contrast common data destruction and disposal methods. This is where we make sure that we are securing our, we're not leaving any residual data on our devices when we are moving away from them, or we happen to be repurposing them. Maybe we are going to, get rid of these old devices by decommissioning or sundowning. We want to make sure that we are not leaving information behind on those. Next up, we have given a scenario applying security settings on SOHO wireless and wired networks. This is where we're going to talk about things like router settings and wireless specific configurations, and as well we'll talk a little bit and have to know a little bit about firewall settings. But notice this is apply, and that is something I want you to keep in mind to this objective. Then last but not least in this very long set of objectives, we have given a scenario, configure the relevant security settings inside of your browser, such as trusted download sources, trusted sources for downloading your information versus untrusted sources, as well as things like patch management in your browsers, understanding the difference between an untrusted and trusted browser plugin, and some of the feature management behind browsers as well. So you can see security has a lot to it as well, but we're not done because we also have software troubleshooting. Now, I'm going to go ahead and let you know this ahead of time. Keep in mind that there's not a lot of objectives here in software troubleshooting, but it still makes up 23% of your overall exam. So even though I'm going to go ahead and let the cat out of the bag, there are only 4 objectives here, it is still a good bulk of your exam weight. So given a scenario, troubleshoot common Windows issues, such as things like blue screen of death, degraded performance, shutdowns, services not starting, application crashing, and a lot more. We look at 3.2, this is going to be the mobile operating system and application issues side of things, right? Applications failing to launch, or they're closing or crashing, they fail to update or install, we have random reboots and connectivity issues, and more there as well. Then notice just a subtlety and difference here. Now it's going to be mobile OS and application security issues, right? Things like downloading from untrusted sources, right? Outside of, for instance, your application stores, developer mode. What's the difference between root access, rooting a mobile device, jailbreaking, right? Some of the things that we have to worry about that, including some of the common symptoms around how we would identify that we have these security issues happening. Next up, we have 3.4. When we look at 3.4, this is given a scenario, troubleshoot common personal security issues, personal computer security issues. I don't know about personal security issues, but personal computer security issues, and a variety of different common symptoms here, such as unable to access your network, right? False alerts. Maybe you have missing antivirus protection. You have operating system updates that are failing. Maybe unwanted applications or even notifications inside of the operating system as well. And that brings us, to domain 4, the last domain, operational procedures. When we look at this, you'll see we have a variety of different things that we need to know here, things like best practices around component handling, asset management, and personnel safety. So in the first thing, in the first 4.1, a lot about asset management and documentation too. For instance, ticketing systems, a whole variety of different things under asset management, and then some of the types of documents that you might see there too. Then we have 4.2. We look at 4.2. This is applying change management. So we have to know a little bit about some of the documented business procedures, what is the change management process, and a variety of attributes under change management. Then we move into 4.3. 4.3, this is where we start to look at things like DR, right? Disaster recovery and business continuity, so backup and recovery mechanisms. We'll talk about backup types, recovery options, and even backup testing here in this objective. This will be what you are required to know. And then we have 4.4. We look at 4.4. This is using common safety procedures, right? These common safety procedures are around the components themselves as well as the people, you, that's right, keeping you safe, as such as, for instance, disconnecting power, lifting techniques, fire safety, things around anti-static bags, proper component handling and storage as well, too. Then in 4.5, we move into environmental impacts and local environment controls. So you're going to have to know a little bit about what was used to be known as the MSDS, the Material Safety Data Sheet. Today it's just the SDS, the Safety Data Sheet. Knowing things about things like climate control around our components, right? So humidity level awareness, proper ventilation, like location and placement, using things like compressed air and electronic or anti-static vacuums, implementing things like power surge protectors through whether it's a surge protector or even uninterruptible power supplies, UPSs. Then we look at explaining the importance of things like, for instance, this one is really around things like incident management, specifically prohibited content, activity, privacy, and licensing and policy concepts too. And it includes things like incident response, digital rights management, end user license agreements, what's a NDA, if you will, and introduces you the concept of regulated data. So for instance, what's the difference between PII, personally identifiable information, PHI, public health care information, or credit card payment information too, such as you'll go on to learn in later, not required for this exam, about standards like PCI DSS or the payment card industry data security standard. Then we get into the professionalism side, right? This is the communication techniques and professionalism sides where you will be required to know, some things around being able to communicate in a professional environment with other people, whether it happens to be users you're supporting or if it's coworkers, and including things like, how to appropriately deal with difficult customers or situations, and things like setting expectations and meeting those expectations. So all very, very important when it comes to professionalism and working inside of a professional environment. Next up, we have explain basics of scripting. We have to look a little bit at some of the different scripting file types, and we have to know some of the use cases for scripting as well. Then we move into 4.9, and when we look at 4.9, this is where we get given a scenario, use remote access technologies. You'll have to be able to identify some methods and some tools and some of the different security considerations for each method, such as using RDP, Remote Desktop Protocol, Virtual Private Networks, Secure Shell, and a couple of other third-party tools in there that you should be aware of likewise. And then we have to explain some of the basic concepts related to artificial intelligence, right? For instance, application integration, some policies, limitations, and the difference between public utilization and private utilization of these technologies too. All right, so that is a little bit about, I guess a lot of bit about the Core 2 exam, the deep dive, but what I want to do is I don't want to leave you hanging. Keep in mind we did, in our episode 1, we did a compare and contrast of the exams for the 1201 and 1202, so you can also find this information there, but I also want to just wrap up by talking a little bit about the exam and some additional resources that you have that you can utilize here as well. So when you're going for the A+ Core 2 220-1202 exam, your exam code is something apparently I can't say, is 220-1202. The questions are going to be 90 questions max. The length of the test is going to be 90 minutes, not including a beginning survey and a survey at the end. So be aware of that, what time you have. The question types, you'll see that when you reference like some of the objectives, they talk about multiple choice and performance-based. All of your questions have multiple choice. So what does that mean? I like to break them down to multiple choice, single answer, again, only requiring a single answer to get the question right or wrong, and then multiple choice, multiple answer, where you might have to choose more than one answer, like choose 2 or choose 3. And then you have performance questions, which require you to actually perform some kind of action, whether it's putting a list in the right order, dragging and dropping to maybe a diagram or something, and you're going to have to know how to apply some of the things that you have learned in that aspect. Now, some of the recommendations to tackling this exam is to have experience of around 12 months in some type of IT support specialist job role. I'll tell you, you don't have to have that. It is recommended, but keep in mind somebody that has already been in the industry for about 12 months, they already have some of the understanding of the language, the jargon, the acronyms, right, and the technologies, so it might be a little bit easier for them. If you're like me, I was a career changer. I was a fast food restaurant manager who changed careers. I didn't have a background, so I had to come to the table and study a little bit harder to kind of learn what somebody would in about 12 months on top of studying for the A+ exam. And then at the end, when we look at what the passing score here is, it's 700, and that is out of a scale from 100 to 900, a little bit more than what the 220-1201 or Core 1 exam is. Remember, that's 675. Last but not least, I want to give you a couple additional resources. Again, keep in mind you can find all of these resources over on our Discord channel. You can find the slides here that they're free to download. Don't charge charge for them. Hopefully they can help you in your studies. Keep in mind that for the exam objectives, go to CompTIA's website. You can find them at this URL. You can get a lot of great information, including the objectives that we've discussed here in this video. Pearson VUE, if you go to take the exam and you need an on-location brick-and-mortar in-house testing center, you can find and locate a testing center at this URL. If you don't have a brick-and-mortar or a location to physically take the test, keep in mind Pearson VUE offers their online platform called OnVUE with some limitations and restrictions around how you take that exam, so definitely read the information when you're making your choice of which 2 of these that you might choose, because there are some requirements for it. And finally, I want to thank you for taking the time and watching me here at WB Training. As always, giving back to the community. If you like what you see here, if you've happened to be here this long in this video, I appreciate you for taking the time and being with me here. If you have some additional things that you want to talk about, join our Discord server, right? And if you want to see videos in the future, do like one of our chat members here, Furious George, thank you for being here, asked, do you plan on doing additional CompTIA exams? Absolutely. I've got some coming up for Network Plus. At this time, it's N10009, but we're also going to talk about Security Plus, and then I will move into some of the other CompTIA exams, eventually covering all of them to help you out for your studies. Again, share these with your friends. Don't forget to like, subscribe, share, and click the notification button so that you know when we are going to go live. And with that, everybody, I leave you. Thank you so much for taking the time and joining me here at WB Training. I've been your host, Wes Bryant.